Yes, it seems to be. Okay, all right. I have no idea why it's working now when it didn't work before, but it is. So I'm satisfied. And that's good enough. All right. Hi. Welcome to the stream today, everybody. I hope you can hear me fine. Please let me know if that's not the case. You hopefully are aware what we're doing today. Yes, it's working. Okay, great. Wonderful. We're going to be talking about politics today. More specifically about politics in Germany, the political situation in Germany, and parties, the parties that are currently, I hope I'm not being too controversial when I say this, currently relevant for the discourse. This will include some political history for the parties and their development, their position today, and just the general context and situation for that. Before we get to that, I want to get a few things out of the way. Firstly, this is not a German learning stream, so there may be some terms or names that will come up that I will, of course, translate. But beyond that, we are not focusing on learning German today. We're focusing on learning something about Germany. On the other end of things, this is also not a discussion or a debate stream, not between me and my guests, and also not really with chat. You are absolutely free to participate in chat, please do, but this is aimed at giving you information, and that is its main purpose. Also, something I want to get out of the way is that, of course, videos like these, just because politics are polarizing, huge topics, etc., there's always going to be some sort of unconscious or conscious bias involved in this, but we will stick to neutral information unless declared differently, unless declared as opinion, etc. And obviously, this is also a huge topic, so we won't be able to cover everything today, as we won't want to go much longer than an hour to 90 minutes max. So we'll mostly focus on an overview of the parties that are currently the biggest, and some context for them. And as always, with these topics, please keep discussion in chat civil, okay? Please. With all that out of the way, I would like to introduce my guest for today, Dan. Dan is the host of the YouTube channel 3 Arrows and the Iron Dice podcast. And beyond that, I'm going to let him introduce himself. Hi, Dan.
Hey, what's up, everyone? People interested in learning German. I can't imagine what you're going through. How's it going? Yeah, I'm Dan. I have a podcast called The Iron Dice. I have, as you just said, a YouTube channel where I upload very occasionally, where I talk about international politics and history and that sort of stuff. Yeah, and that's about it.
That's about it. Okay. And as we can read in your YouTube description, you're a history baller. So,
Oh yeah.
so that is a lot of what's going to be relevant today. Please check out Dan's podcast. It's really, really good. It gives you a really good idea of the political situation at the start of the 20th century.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh yeah, I should say it's about my podcast is about history, and our current series is going through the collapse of the Wilhelmina German Empire at the end of World War I, and the emergence of the Weimar Republic, and the factions in that state fighting for power and survival.
Yes. It's like a really cool, interesting Game of Thrones type of thing if it wasn't so real.
Oh, I hope it ends better though.
Yeah. Yes, let's hope. Less dragons, more satisfying conclusion. All right, and also there's one last thing I want to get out of the way. Dan is German, I am German, but we're going to be speaking English today, even though that may seem a bit weird. Why? Because just for accessibility reasons. Basically, I want to give you information, and I want to give that information to as many people as possible, especially those of you who have already moved to Germany or are considering doing it. Also, of course, those who are just interested in the topic, including any people who are joining us today who saw Dan retweet my announcement on Twitter and are joining us from the probably not so German-speaking side of things. And I know that foreign politics, with maybe for better or for worse the exception of the US, is a very tricky thing to get into and something that most people just don't know a lot about, but still something interesting, especially and possibly very important if you're planning to move. So that's why we're doing this in English. Right. So to start us off, I would like to get into a bit of the history of what we're even talking about. Because what's interesting about Germany as a country, as a state, is that the country is very old, but the state, as we know it today, hasn't really existed for that long. It's been around for about 30 years. And as you can see from these maps, even in the last 50 years before that, so the last 80 years, looking back from today, it changed a bunch again and again. So, and even before that, it changed a bunch of times. So maybe, Dan, maybe you want to give us a quick overview, as quick as possible, of what stages Germany went through since about 1900, or more likely the end of the First World War, which was 1918.
Yeah, gladly. So just real quick, Germany founded in 1871 after the French get dumpstered in the Franco-Prussian War, which is finally the thing that pushes all the different city-states that make up what we now know today as Germany to unite under a Kaiser. That's founded in 1871 and exists until the end of World War I, where the order collapses under the weight of Germany losing the biggest conflict the world had ever seen, and the monarchist system is totally discredited in this. And what emerges from that is the Weimar Republic. This is kind of the map that's on screen right now. That's the Kaiserreich. So that's the second, what's usually referred to as the Second Reich, not the Nazi Third Reich, but the Second Reich under the Kaiser.
So maybe as a note on that, because I'm sure some people might be wondering about that now. So what's the First Reich?
The First Reich is the Holy Roman Empire. Yeah.
Yes, that was much earlier still, and not really German. It was technically Germany, but it was, it was the Holy Roman Empire. Very church-like.
And was neither of the three, and it really wasn't German either.
Exactly. So that's why this is the Second Empire, and why the Nazi Germany, or the Nazi state, whatever, it has different names, was calling itself the Third Reich. Yes. So then, sorry, exactly. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
All good. And then, obviously, Germany lost swaths of its territory after the Treaty of Versailles. An independent Poland gets formed with access to the sea. Germany loses Alsace-Lorraine to the French. They lose parts of Denmark. And this losing of territory really creates a lot of anxiety in the country. Back then, there were propaganda posters showing this new map of Germany, which is still pretty big, and phrase it as a sort of mutilation, and that Germany was just like being butchered up by people from the outside. Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
Oh, okay. No. I'm just nodding in agreement. Yes, because from today's view, this looks, it's bigger than we're used to, right? But when you compare it to the Kaiserreich, of course, there was a bunch lost. And then also there's the connection, of course, to people feeling like losers because of the war.
Exactly, yeah. It was hugely traumatizing. And of course, after World War II, Germany gets even smaller. And because we're about to get into the political parties, was actually a hot button issue in German politics for a long time. Like the Conservative Party, for instance, prided themselves on never, ever accepting the what was called the Oder-Neisse line, which are two rivers that flow along the German border of today to Poland, right? Yeah. But obviously, after losing the Second World War, now Germany didn't have much of a say in this, and at the end of the day, they arranged themselves with it, and most of the Germans who lived in those areas that got separated from Germany proper then fled into Germany proper.
Right.
Right.
Which brings us then into our next big chunk of history with, again, we're speeding through this, but this is where we start with this map that's here on Wikipedia, the first one to the left, which just like the other two after it, which there's some minor changes that are not worthy discussing of the whole, with the whole thing in mind, but there's a big chunk missing here, and I think a lot of people watching will probably be more familiar with this because I think a lot of you probably have heard at some point about East Germany or the GDR, in German DDR. That's what this other gray chunk with half of Berlin in the middle is.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So at the end of World War II, the kind of like consensus among the Allies breaks apart, and it becomes clear that countries like France, the US, and Britain have have a very different interest in a country like the Soviet Union. So the part of Germany that is occupied by the Soviets, which is called the Soviet occupied zone, becomes its own nation state, which makes up like a third of the country, basically. And it basically functions as like a Soviet satellite state. Economy gets nationalized, all that stuff. That's typical for like a Soviet aligned state at the time. And Western Germany becomes part of the Western liberal Western sphere.
Right, was also
markets,
split up among
capitalism and stuff like that.
Sorry, was also split up among the Allied forces, of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
As occupational zones, but yes. So this was part of the communist bloc, if you want to call it that, which also meant that the political landscape, of course, developed very differently, both in how people grew up, what parties were present, or what party, really. And that will be relevant particularly for one of the parties we'll talk about later. So we're not going to get into that much more now. But to lead us to today's, where we are today, of course, nowadays Germany is united and has been since 89, when the wall came down. The wall, by the way, is the wall in Berlin. But that was breaking the GDR open, basically. Yes, so that's how we arrive at the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, the BRD that we have today. And although that's fairly recent, there's been quite a lot of developments that are, of course, still very much connected to the decades before 1990. And the same is true for most of the parties we're going to talk about today. So, right. So let's maybe start off with the first party then. We're going to, Dan, I'm going to ask you for a little, like, your opinion or knowledge on where each of these parties is roughly placed on the political spectrum. And if that changed a lot, how that relates to their original placement on that spectrum, when they first were founded and got up.
Yeah.
For that, I want to start with one of the... I zoomed in a lot for those maps. Hold on. Let me zoom back out to 100% and back in to 100%. Good enough. Okay. One of the two big parties that was also, or the two of which made up the government until this year, and who are considered the two big opposing forces, or have been considered that. One of which is the SPD, which has one of the most interesting long-standing histories of the parties that are around today. And I know you know a lot about that, because you have talked a lot about that.
Oh yeah, like for me, talking about Weimar Germany, a lot of it is just the history of the political maneuvering of the Social Democrats. Yeah, SPD, German Social Democrats. Before the founding of Germany proper in 1871, the enduring and the largest political party in the entire world. second to none in terms of being on the vanguard of advancing workers' rights and that sort of stuff, pushing for more democracy.
Right, because they were founded before then. You can see that
Yeah.
on the Wikipedia page as well. It says here 1863, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
After the ban on being a social democrat got lifted in Prussia, yeah. And after they experienced a huge boom, and a bunch of famous revolutionaries looked to the SPD as like the vanguard of advancing workers' rights.
Right, so that was what they were all about.
That was what, yeah, they're very different now.
Right, that's the thing.
I mean-
So originally we would sort them very much to the left, very, well, not authoritarian, but like for the workforce, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's why
they
they're
were
called
about-
Sozialdemokratisch, right? Because it's social. It's about having a social state.
Yeah, at this time that we just talked about, they were about, in terms of parties, the most left-wing option that there was. Now, these days, after going a huge transformation, it's almost more than 100 years now, they're sort of like center-left, fitting into that European dichotomy of center-left against center-right mostly.
Right. Because, and this is kind of a general tendency that we're going to see with a lot of the parties here, the bigger you get, or rather the bigger you want to get, and the more you want to stay relevant over time as a party, the more there is a tendency to have to move towards the political center. Why? Because, as with all averages, most people are going to be somewhere in the center, especially with what they vote for. And of course, if you want to then keep that position, you're not going to suddenly drift off. At least I'm not aware of any parties that have ever, had a comfortable position somewhere in the middle of the spectrum and suddenly been like, no, well, let's go radical now. At least not. At least not openly. Let's say that.
I mean, yeah, I get what you're trying to say. It's kind of like it's endemic in politics in itself. If you become a big party and you become a big tent, you'll have to incorporate a lot of different ideas, and you become entrenched in the political structure, and as such become less radical because you now work inside the system. That's just how it works.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the way I phrased that might have come off as a very negative framing, which it isn't, like, not essentially. By the way, I'm so sorry. I'm just putting in my headphones now. I'm very used to not having headphones because I hate it. So I hope there wasn't too much of an echo so far. My speakers weren't turned up very high, but now we're making sure that it's gone. Anyway, back to the topic. It's not necessarily a bad thing to move more to, like, temperate policies and, like, more what you might even want to call realistic views of, how things should work, etc. Because, of course, the more power you have, the more actual change you can actually affect. So there's something to be said for that. But once again, I'm going to point to Dan's podcast, because the role of the SPD in the Weimar Republic, so the statehood that Germany was in right before the Nazis got into power, or seized power, we should say, is very interesting, and it was still a very different party back then. So nowadays, like you said, they're more center-left. Some people might even accuse the SPD of completely giving up on their original voter base. Do you think that's justified?
I think it's the accusation is justified, and it's also justified that the SPD would think that is something they should do.
Why?
Because if we look at electoral politics today, so we can talk about the moment the SPD really shifted, like their neoliberal turn in the early 2000s, or where they're today. In terms of today, let's say hypothetically the Social Democrats move far to the left, or move to the left even a little bit, and absorb all the votes that, like, the parties further to the left than them, like the left party, get. That wouldn't even make them as big as the Conservatives. Or the Conservatives, let's say, mid 2020.
Right.
Conservatives has been undergoing like a decline recently.
We'll get
but
into
yeah,
that.
so they think they discount like non-voters in this calculation, but they make the calculation that okay, who is even voting in this country, and how do we get the people who are voting to vote for us? And if the majority of people are like kind of fall into the center, that's where they're gonna gravitate to for electoral success.
Exactly, and they're going to try to compete on the topics that somebody introduces into the discourse and then prove to be popular or something people are worried about, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Which also, I think, is a good point for us to look at the other big player in German politics, which is the CDU, Christlich-Demokratische Union, which are the center conservative party. Right, so center right,
Yeah.
who, like you just mentioned, have always been or not always. Sorry, always is a very big term, but for the last decades have been a very, very strong force in German politics.
Absolutely.
Was almost guaranteed that in national elections they would get about 30%, if not more. Oh, by the way, sorry, I assumed this to be like a given, but just to anyone who this isn't clear to, the system we have in Germany is a federal democracy, which means that Germany is split into 16 federal states, all of which have a federal government, but then every 4 years we elect a national government. So while there are federal states that may be ruled by different parties, just, like there's historic tendencies everywhere, there is a tendency for some federal states to always vote majority center-left or majority center-right. There's a tendency, so what we're talking about right now is the general national tendency, right? So overall, the Christian Conservatives or center-right party, CDU, has always polled very reliably good numbers. That's changed a bit.
I think in the last 40 years, for 32 or at least over 30, they have been the biggest party in parliament. So absolutely hegemonic for the last 4 decades.
Do you have a take on why that is?
I think. I mean, it's hard to discuss like these like macro political trends because you have to be very reductive. But at least if we're looking at the last 20 years, it's absolutely what you just said, that the SPD, that a lot of people who voted for the Social Democrats had the feeling that they had been sold out by them, and thus looked for alternatives in other places.
Right. And then also, I mean, you could also say that, the more wealthy a state is, the more the potential grows for people to want things to like stay as they are, and that's the definition of conservatism. That's, again, it's a very reductive view of all this, of course.
I think that's what you're getting at. I feel like that's a very German thing. Like if you're asking in German, like if Germany is doing good, they're going to measure that by comparing themselves to country like Italy, country like Spain, Greece, not a country like Sweden or Norway.
True.
And compared to those countries, of course, you say, oh well, look at all this financial stability that we have. Better keep it going and keep it that way. So one vote for the CDU, please. And that's the way it has been for the last 20, 40 years.
That is true. This is careening a bit off of the topic of politics, but there is something to be said for German, the overarching German mindset, if there is such a thing, tending towards, or trending against innovation, too early or too soon.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if for your watchers who are interested in like the intricate history of German party politics, there was this famous election poster of Konrad Adenauer, which said, it was an election poster that just said no experiments in the face of him. So you can see what like the parties are aiming at.
No experiments, you mean, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of experimente. Yeah. And I mean, this is also what all throughout the Merkel era, the CDU specifically was super successful with. Whenever a national election came up, they would just make electoral advertisements that basically just showed Merkel saying stuff like, evoking these senses of like, we know her, we like her, she's been doing fine to well, and we should keep it that way, right? To the point where even I live in Baden-Württemberg, southwestern Germany, which is a very traditionally conservative federal state, but elected a green, which we'll get to, federal government quite a few years ago now. And when it was time for re-election, the leader of the Green Party in Baden-Württemberg also went for evoking the sense of familiarity to the point where there was literally the sentence, "Sie kennen mich, you know me," on the ads. So
yes.
I do think that's an interesting trend that kind of evokes American politics in some ways. So the CDU is basically establishment, and they, excuse the language, kind of shit the bed on the national election this last September.
This goes into what you were just saying. If people feel like they're relatively comfortable, like it could be worse, they're gonna vote by affect, basically. That's what like defines their political understanding, and that explains what you just said about the Green candidate in Baden-Württemberg, and it also explains why the chancellor candidate of the Social Democrats, who is the main opposition party to the Conservatives, absolutely played into this, being like the natural successor of someone who should be on the different side of politics.
Right.
And it just happened so that the CDU picked someone to succeed Merkel, who everyone hated and whose affect was not popular at all. And then combined with a couple of other factors, like the mismanagement of the COVID crisis and the corruption scandal, led to one of the worst results the Conservatives have gotten in history this September.
Right. That's a very good summary of that. And that despite the fact that I think there was a general feeling in Germany that none of the candidates that we had available were anybody's favorite. Was kind of an interesting parallel to the US election for many people in the last year.
Yes, I mean, I certainly felt that way.
Yeah, me too. To bring in a bit of a personal perspective. One last thing I do want to mention about the CDU. There is a special branch, if you want to call it that, of the CDU that only exists in Bayern, in Bavaria, called the CSU, which is why the totality of the CDU and CSU, who, if they are elected, they work together in the national government, which is why they are usually just called the Union, because both of them have the word union in their name. So the CSU is Bavaria's own version of the conservative center-right party, who tend to be a bit further to the right than the general CDU. Again, general statement, of course, but it isn't. Yeah.
I think that's pretty undeniable. I mean, especially under Merkel, the CDU has been undergoing a bit of like a reformation, as you just said, moving more to the center, even on issues that were conservative strongholds, like mandatory military service, which got abolished virtually overnight under a conservative-led government. We got same-sex marriage under a conservative-led government.
Although to be fair, there is I think justified contention about whether or not that's necessarily to be credited to the conservative part of the government.
No, of course not. But it wouldn't have passed without the conservatives going along with it.
That is
let's
true.
say.
That is true.
And these are things that traditionally were very much conservative strongholds, and the CSU latches onto that much more than the CDU does.
That's true. Yeah, so this is just a quirk of German politics, basically, that we have. There is a history behind it that we're not going to get into now because we need to get to a few other parties too. So the Union, the Christian Democrats, split into two factions, basically, who work together on a national level, but for the rest of the time, Bavaria is kind of doing its own thing in that party.
As always.
Which I didn't know if I was going to go there, but yeah, I was going to say it tracks. So let's move on to the next party. Who should we take next? What did I pick up here? Oh, wait, I think I skipped over a party. Anyway, so let's continue with the FDP. That's not online with the election results, but we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, so let's start with the FDP. The FDP stands for Freie Demokratische Partei, which means Free Democratic Party. What does that mean, Dan?
I mean, free is very much the key word here. Free in the sense for the Free Democrats, who are like market liberals, means freedom in the market, basically. So they're situated at the center of German politics in the sense that they're socially liberal and economically very conservative, in parts even more so than the Conservative Party itself. Mm-hmm. They're like, while the CDU, CSU kind of grew out of a conservative tradition that was connected to also Christianity, with all those themes that encapsulates, like, helping poor people is good. The Free Democratic Party did not have that, and as such, much more market radical, and are sort of as like Milton Friedman acolytes, and that very much defines their political self-image in the country.
Right. So they tend to be called Gutverdienerpartei, which basically means good income party. So wealthy people party. So the cliche is that people who are in like state employed make good money there, or own businesses or whatever. So basically people who have money, who can afford their very what do you say? Well, liberally focused ideals. They support them. Those are the people who elect them. And beyond that, they don't have much to offer to people who can't keep up in that sort of system. So this is the word liberal gets thrown around a lot nowadays, and is often mixed with, especially like in the U.S. Cosmos, is mixed a lot with left, just leftist. Seems to be almost synonymous with liberal a lot of the time, which is not really the case. Liberal in this case means they're very much for the free market, to sum it up in one sentence.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the US you would almost call this like a libertarian position, but for them, freedom and liberal means like freedom from state intervention, basically.
Right. Is that positive freedom? I always mix those up. Positive or negative freedom? That's negative freedom, right? Yeah, freedom from is negative freedom.
That's possible, yeah.
I think freedom from is negative freedom. Freedom to is positive freedom. Anyway, yes. So as few rules as possible, let everyone do their thing, and the market will take care of it all, which...
Yes.
Careful. I'm going to put exclamation marks around this opinion, which is not how it works. But, right. So the FDP are kind of interesting in the German context insofar that they have been kind of a political chameleon, where just of how they position themselves, they have been able to glomp on to different coalition partners, basically. Because unlike in many other countries where many other things work, but in Germany, usually the government is never consists of just one party. It's usually a coalition, at least in the last few decades. I actually don't know. When was the last time we had a non-coalition government? Do you know?
I'm not sure that even exists at any time.
Right?
I have no idea.
Right. So our last government, by the way, was what we call the Great Coalition, which was just CDU and SPD. But there are even things like 3-party coalitions, which is what we have now as of this most recent election. And the FDP are part of that, partly because even though they are surprisingly inflexible in some points, they are able enough to not focus on some very contentious issues, because their main concern doesn't seem to lie with policies that other parties sink their teeth in a lot. So they find a lot of common ground with different parties, at least historically.
Oh yeah, they're very adaptable, and it's also that they try to find a balance between their voter base and their constituency, if that makes sense. Like, is this going to make the people mad that vote for us? Like raising the minimum wage? Probably not. Is it gonna make people mad who are their core constituency, who shape like in which the direction the party goes? Absolutely. But they have like more freedom to navigate around that than other parties might have.
Right. And also, interestingly enough, and this did show in in our national election in September, they have recently, within the last few years, really put a lot of effort into emphasizing topics that are very relevant to young people, such as the push for more digitalization, which I'm not even sure is a word in English, but is super, super important to the German discourse, because our internet connection is very, very much not up to par with a Western power state.
Yes.
And they're now advocating for, well, under the mantle of being liberal, they have now been advocating also for trans rights, in the sense that you don't have to go through the arduous process that it has been so far to get your name changed, get your gender changed officially. They are also putting up the position for the legalization of weed, of marijuana. So they've been really trying to hit a younger base recently, and it's been working for them. And maybe we can hit on that a little bit when we talk about the government we're getting now, that's still setting up.
Yes.
And for that, let's introduce before we get to our 2 final parties, let's introduce the third party that, besides the FDP and the SPD, so the Social Democrats and the Free Democrats, the Libertarians that we just discussed, are part of our current now government. Die Grünen, the Green Party. Bündnis 90, Die Grünen is the whole name, which is because they, at some point, formed one party out of 2 parties. That's why they have that long name. But they're the Green Party, which, as the name suggests, means they are, they prioritize the environment, the climate crisis, and generally, living responsibly is maybe a good way to put it into under, and tend very much towards the left spectrum. They're moving more and more to the center as well, but they used to be a lot more on the left.
They used to be
radical, right?
Yeah, they used to be they had a generally big anti-capitalist wing when they were founded. Because if you're very into environmentalism, it eventually goes into questioning the profit motive and stuff like that being the most important thing. They also were arguing for Germany leaving NATO, and of course on those 2 positions, it's like they did like a 180. It's a completely different party today, but they underwent that was a long and arduous process. For instance, in 1999, when the Kosovo War broke out, and the question was, should Germany be part of the NATO intervention? The party leader, Joschka Fischer, got screamed at a party meeting, being like a warmonger, and he got a balloon thrown on him filled with pain, and it was a very dramatic process the Greens underwent to now the this more, except instead of being a party of like radical environmentalists that they might have started out in the 90s, they're more like, okay, we have to do this. Let's find a common sense approach. That's very much like their self-branding.
Right, right. It's about finding a way to do something, to affect something, which leads to the fact that they're often accused of compromising their ideals at the current state of things. And I do think there is sort of a struggle between this whole thing of like, well, they have to be electable, which they're having been a Green government that was elected in, like I said, one of the federal states was a big step for that, for sure. That was like a big part of the like proper rise to electability, if you want to call it that. But also, on the other hand, bringing up these big questions that are shied away from a lot and talked about a lot without doing anything about it. And of course, because of that, there's a lot of pressure on them to then be the ones that live up to those ideals, possibly more so than other parties.
Yeah, I mean, a good showcase for that is like sort of switching your position from, okay, we need to fundamentally restructure our economy and the way we think about the environment and that sort of stuff, to kind of shifting your position to, okay, this is really important, and if we get enough electric cars on the street, we can make that happen. You know, sort of shifting your position from something that overhauls the system to something that is working from inside the system.
Right. Sorry, I got distracted. I told Dan right before the stream I cannot look at chat because I immediately get distracted. I did it for 1 second. I immediately got distracted.
Classic mistake.
Right? Anyway, yes, that's basically the Green. Like with everything, we could say a lot more, but I do think we'll push that to talking about the current government as well. I do still want to get to Die Linke, which is a very interesting party, at the very least historically, but also in their position currently in the last few years. So Die Linke is a party that originally formed out of the party that was formed out of the Communist Party of East Germany, ex-East Germany. Right, so the Communist Party, the big party in the GDR, basically rebranded itself after Germany reunited, and then later rebranded itself again. It wasn't just a name change, but it went along with a name change.
Yes. Exactly. So the like the one party state that East Germany was governed by the SED, and when the East kind of got absorbed by the West and it became one state, it became the Party for Democratic Socialism, and that party then merged with disgruntled Social Democrats who split off from the Social Democrats,
being disappointed with them
2000s.
not being social enough, basically at that point already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they felt betrayed by the Schröder-Fischer government at that time, who underwent a lot of liberal reforms.
Actually, can we take a short excursion? I don't even know if you say that, in a short detour to that short topic, because we've been saying, and that's generally what people say, that we had a government dominated by the CDU for the last 16 years, the time that Merkel was our chancellor. But in reality, before that, we had another, how long was Kohl? Another 16 years?
Yeah.
Another 16 years of a CDU-led government in some shape or form. And that was very shortly, disrupted by a government made up of the SPD and the Green Party, which should have been expected, we should say, to make a lot of changes towards a more social, more, what do you say, like working class, lower middle class friendly state, basically, but ended up really drifting towards a lot of liberal, like you said, liberal policies that were introduced during that era.
Yes, I mean, you can run down the list. Like under this social democratic government, who traditionally always positioned itself against this is like a great turn of phrase to know for someone who learns German. Soziale Kälte, like social coldness, basically like being heartless, and being there for like the little guy and the worker and stuff like that, making sure everybody is situated okay. And they kind of threw that off and used their term to slash pensions, liberalize the labor market, all stuff you can think of with the aim we have to do this. Germany has to be competitive and stuff like that. And there wasn't even like a big debate allowed about it. Like it was just like this: we just have to do this. There's no alternative, and that's why some people split off from the party, because they felt like even if they wanted to be in opposition to that and wanted to serve the party in a different direction, they had no chance to. And this is like this is in line with like the global trend of this happening. You know, of course, there was the New Democrats under Bill Clinton in the U.S. There was New Labour under Tony Blair in the U.K. Kind of all these like traditionally like working class parties shifting more towards liberalism, and this is like the fall from grace that the SPD has suffered from since then, and why they have a tough time electorally until this last election, at least.
They lost a lot of trust in that time.
That's the main issue. Yeah, it's not like the people don't like their policies. Their policies are mostly more popular than conservative policies. But the main issue, if you look at polling, is that people do not trust them to actually enact those policies.
Yeah, and I personally, I find that very understandable, to the point where I observe myself having that attitude before I filter it rationally in one way or the other. Because, as always with politics, it's easy to get unfair in one direction or the other, but I don't think it's in any way debatable that the SPD has messed up big time, especially. I think the big problem is not even necessarily just the policies that you introduce, but it is how you sell them and what they actually turn out to be. And if you sell a push for bettering the state of the German market and economy as something that is going to be good for the people, and then over the years, people, however informed they were before that, just notice, because they live the reality that is there now, notice that it couldn't have been developed with them in mind at all, they're going to be bitter about that. And I think at the very least, the SPD was failed strategically at the very least in that regard.
I think that's that's a very uncontroversial opinion. Like the SPD knows that themselves. They're pretty open about it. Like at the core of their reforms, for instance, was like what's called the Hartz IV reform, where they would restructure unemployment benefits to a far less generous state of being. But when it was introduced, it was criticized by the left wing of the party as Armut nach Gesetz, so poverty by law, basically.
Right. That
just
you're basically,
condemning people.
Yeah, you're putting people into this position that they will have very, very tough way out of, basically.
Yes, and the SPD today is positioning against that. They want to get rid of that, the thing that they introduced themselves. So they are obviously conscious about screwing up.
Right. That's the thing about losing trust. It works on an interpersonal level, and it works on a large scale level. It's not something that you recover from within like 1 or 2 election cycles, unfortunately. Okay, but let's get back to the Linke.
Yes.
Maybe to address a point that may be floating around in a lot of heads when being confronted with this, especially this history. Are Die Linke communists?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, there might be some people in there who are communists, but the party in itself and what they advocate for are not. And they're not even there's the debate: are they revolutionaries? No, they're not, because they're a political party that's
They're
working
very
like
much
inside the
operating
government.
within the given system. Yes, exactly.
Yes, and I mean, there are people in there. You could make the case they're like democratic socialists, but communists, far from it.
Yes, because technically, and this is not a value judgment at all, but if you had a like properly communist party, that could very soon or would be considered anti-democratic, which is not something that is allowed, right? Because as soon as you have something that disrupts the democratic system, the democratic system is no longer going to exist in the long run. So they may have developed from that by default, but that's not what they are. They are, however, very much focused on social reforms to the point where what they were calling for, as one example, of course, the election programs are much bigger than this, but one of the things they were calling for in this most recent election was taxing the rich massively and noticeably, much more than they are being taxed right now. And by the rich, by the way, just because I think this topic always gets people confused a lot, that's talking about people making, I think, upwards of like 600,000 a year.
Yeah.
And then I think once it's 2 million a year, it should have gotten even more, something like that.
Yeah.
Which again,
very steep wealth tax.
Sorry?
You like a wealth tax, basically.
Yes.
It's not just people who like earn more than average, but like just really like people who are just loaded,
Yeah, general wealth. Exactly. It's not just income, but and it would have also affected like inheriting and ownership tax, I think, was also part of it. So all kinds of aspects that are basically there to make sure that people who are already super rich don't profit of the state even more, to the detriment of people who are working for I'm blanking, Lohn. What's it called?
like salary.
A salary, thank you. Yes. There was another point I wanted to make about that. I forgot. Doesn't matter.
No big deal. You'll think of it later.
Exactly. Before we get to the last party that was very relevant, and this last election has been relevant for a few years, I want to take a quick look at two maps. This map is mostly to show you, because this is not about this is about the Bundesrat, which is another political organ that we have in Germany. We're not going to get into the details of the system today because it is so complicated that by now I have learned it very well 4 times, and I'm still very insecure about the details.
Oh, I'm glad we're not getting into that.
Yes.
I'm very stupid.
It is. Yes, right? You know it's super complicated, but you still feel like an idiot when you can't explain it. So we're not going to get into that, and it would put everybody to sleep, I'm sure. But just to show you how the federal thing can work, all of these combinations, as you can see down here, are the majorities that were elected for the Bundesrat, not the Bundestag, in these federal states. So here, for example, this is Baden-Württemberg. You have Green and minor CDU, so the center right. Here we have a party that we didn't talk about today, and we want to talk about today at all because they're not relevant to the general discourse. But yeah, Germany has a lot of different parts and a lot of different makeups. And I wanted to show this because it's not shown as well in this map, which shows the majority results of the national election in September. It says here, Parteien mit den meisten Zweitstimmen. Zweitstimme means second vote. Just as a very, very brief explanation for that, when we vote, I hate W's and V's, in a general election, it's horrible. We have 2 votes, basically. We have 1 vote that goes towards the local or the representative of our Wahlkreis, which for all intents and purposes is like our county, basically, who then the person who wins that minor election, that first vote election, gets sent to the Bundestag, the cabinet, directly, while we then have a second vote that we put towards a national party who then puts people in the Bundestag from a list. So that's a very brief summary of how that works. So this is showing off the majority votes for the national parties for each Wahlkreis, so county, essentially, voting circle is what that's translated, in Germany. Red is SPD, black is CDU or CSU, again, that's just Bavaria. Green is the Greens, and blue is the AfD, that's the Alternative für Deutschland, alternative for Germany, who we haven't talked about at all yet, but will in just a second. You can see the south of Germany tends very much towards center-right and conservatism, while the north clearly tends towards still the Social Democrats, despite all the issues we talked about that they had in the past. And these little green spots, although they look so minuscule, make up a lot of voters because they tend to be in big cities or metropolitan areas. But then we have this blue block. It's very visibly very restricted to a particular part of Germany. Let's talk about the Alternative für Deutschland, what this even is, and what the phenomenon around them is. So I was thinking about how to best
Should I start out, or do you
off.
want to start out, or?
If you have something in mind how to start off, go ahead, sure.
Okay, yeah. So the AfD had their conception in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, which was followed by the Euro crisis, where a lot of people got angry that they felt like Germany was paying like the bulk of the burden for like financially irresponsible countries. In their mind, financially irresponsible countries like Greece, in Italy, and Spain. And the AfD positioned themselves against that very consciously. Like, we don't want like our money going to these people who just like spend it on, who just use it as like funny money, basically.
Who are basically mooching, yes. They were founded,
Yes,
by the way,
exactly.
since that they got their beginnings in the financial crisis, but they were founded in 2013. So that was like the lead up. But they were founded in 2013, which was an election year. And basically their only point at that point, if I remember correctly, was we don't like Europe. Let's leave Europe. That was basically all there was to the AfD at that point.
Yeah, this is like what characterizes the AfD, and this is pretty much every issue, is that on a lot of big questions in Germany, especially in the last 20 years, there isn't a whole lot of disagreement between all the major parties. That's just a fact. It's like there's just a consensus on things like, should we be in the EU? Like, all major parties were in favor of that, except for like a little bit opposition of like the left party, for instance. And it was the same with bailing out Greece, because like, let's be honest, Germany massively benefited from Greece staying afloat and giving them loans and stuff. Like, this was not disadvantageous to Germany or the German taxpayer.
No. It was just sold to us that way because, of course, it's much simpler to say we're giving them a lot of money. They're mooching off of us.
Yeah, they're getting your money. Like, the Greeks are getting your money. That was basically what the AfD was like parading. And in
By the way,
2015, go on.
Sorry, did you at that point did you ever catch wind of the like political caricatures and stuff that were floating around in I think it was Spain, Italy, and probably also Greece, of Merkel basically colonizing especially Greece, but also at some point Italy and Spain?
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's
like
a
being
fair
the new
critique
Hitler, even at the like big extent of that.
Yeah, of course, not going that far. But if you look at a country like Greece, who is absolutely broken by Germany's involvement, we don't have to go too far into this, but basically, like, a lot of European countries like France wanted, hey, let's all band together and help out a country like Greece. And Germany was like, nah, let's get the Americans in here, like the International Monetary Fund. And now Greece is under advanced economic supervision for at least an additional 50 years. So Yeah, it was not like Germany was being altruistic there, but
Which was
like
not the point of the European Union, right? I mean, the point there was to form, you know, a community. No, not what you call it, but like a bond for better and worse. And of course, when you get several countries in there with different political, and economical situations and stages of development, whatever you want to throw in there, there's going to be risks involved in that.
Yeah, and it also wasn't the like thinking, oh, they are just financially irresponsible. That is like very unfair. The way the EU was set up and was not that they like did everything right, but it was like hard for them to compete with a country like Germany, who is like has a huge industrial output and an industrial like economic base compared to like a country like Greece. But getting back to the AfD and this consensus politics, where they got their biggest boost from yet was in 2015 when the refugee crisis happened after the refugee camps in the Middle East lacked funding, and a lot of people saw their only chance to make it to Europe. And Angela Merkel made the decision that was pretty much without an alternative to take a big chunk of the refugees who were already in Europe, and then like in her mind have them redistributed around Europe if they have like a legit claim to asylum, or deport them or whatever. And the AfD rallied against that, saying, well, let's just not do it. Like, who cares?
Right. And this was basically, it wasn't a rebranding, because they didn't consciously like change anything about their, like they never really acknowledged it as much as they just shifted from like the kind of libertarian right to like far right. Of course, presenting themselves differently, but turning into fully, or well, they were a populist party before this. But when before they had really only been focusing on the Europe issue, basically they used the refugee crisis as this set of jumpstart, you could say, for
their, absolutely.
Yeah, for their line today.
It was something that a lot of people felt like that had been jammed down their throats, like they had no say in, because there was a consensus in German politics that Germany should do this. And there was no like constructive approach from the AfD to any alternative. And this characterizes, I would say, most issues. Like, of course, this is like my opinion, but like holding if you're like a nationalist and you think Germany should be strong, think that Germany should like abandon the euro and reintroduce the Deutschmark, that's just plain dumb, because it gives Germany a huge amount of influence and power that the euro exists. But it's like, it's mostly like, I guess we will get to the term when you talk about election results, but it's a protest party. You're like, you're unhappy with the way things are going, and if the people, and you vote for the people who say, yeah, things are like kind of messed up. One thing that is important though is that the AfD is, while they claim to be like, okay, screw these elite politicians, like we're for the little man, in actual policy, they're very market radical. Like, so they, in economic terms, they are much more aligned with like the Free Democrats than with any other party.
Right, and in line with that, the vast majority of the people who end up voting for them, not so much because of their actual positioning, but because of what they put out propaganda-wise, and because, like you said, as a form of protest, their policies are actually not going to benefit those people, and in part going to be to their detriment, apart from the fact that genuinely the ideals that are pushed by a lot of party representatives are very, very regressive, concerning women's rights, concerning LGBT rights, concerning the idea of how a society should work in general. And a lot of the stuff that they put forward is not very thought through to this day.
Yeah, it goes back to like what we talked about earlier. It's affect, you know. You're positioning yourself against the establishment, even though you're kind of bringing the same policies that like got like the East, for instance, into this mess, which is market radicalism. But because you give off this vibe, that's what people gravitate to.
Yeah. And there is, of course, just to acknowledge this, there is a huge parallel in this to both the general push towards the right in a lot of European countries, such as Denmark and France and others. And also, of course, we can draw parallels to Trump and his electoral base in some ways here, largely with who votes for this party and how good, like, what is that based on? Which is actually the next question I want to get to. Why do you think they're so popular? Became so popular and are popular to this day. We'll look at the election results in a second.
I think that in the wake of 2015, where we had over 10 years of a politics where the parties that should be the most opposed to one another, the two big people's parties, the Volksparteien, the Social Democrats
SPD
and the CDU.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Governed together, which kind of left the far-right elements in the conservatives with no real place to go. And in the AfD, they found like a new way of expressing themselves. It's not like there was like no far right in Germany before the emergence of the AfD, but there was no real like electoral vehicle that was explicitly far right, and the AfD tapped into that.
And that's the thing.
Into that niche.
We had a basic, at that point, at the very least, but I think always, openly new Nazi party before the AfD ever came into being, which was the NPD, which have since become completely irrelevant. Which, is a part to what, where we place the AfD. It kind of speaks to that, seeing that the former Nazi party has basically disappeared from the spectrum.
Oh yeah, they sucked up all the. There are a lot of like far right splinter groups, parties in Germany who are like not electorally successful on a national scale, but like got decimated by the rise of the AfD.
Do you remember though? Like you have to imagine and this is the stuff that's hard to understand when you're not in a country. So the NPD, I at least grew up with a very present knowledge that there is such a thing as neo-Nazis and that they are in Germany, that they exist, and that they are politically active, and that they are essentially a danger and something that you could get very upset about just on the basis of everything about them. But on the other hand, whether you were aware of it or not, they were never really something to be taken seriously. At the very least, not in parts of Germany where they had no real chance of affecting politics in any way. There are some parts, specifically in northeastern Germany, where they had somewhat of a foothold, but never on a level that would have been nationally relevant.
Yes.
And that's different for the AfD.
Yeah, I mean, we should say that the AfD is not just a homogenous blob. There is a big fight for power going on inside the parties. Like these two people you can see on the screen right now, Jörg Meuthen and Tino Chrupalla, who are the guys on the right side of the screen there. These two guys absolutely despise one another, and you can see that in every press conference because they're like representing different wings of the party. In the West, the party is definitely to the right of every other political party, but they're a bit more like mellowed out,
temperate. Yeah.
They're phrasing their policies differently. They're saying, okay, we don't want any immigrants. That's like their message. While in the East, the same topic might be talked about in much, much different terms, saying, okay, we don't want immigrants because they like dilute.
Oh. Hold on, I can't hear you
conscious
anymore.
Connection to the far right.
Oh, there you are again.
Sorry?
I couldn't hear you for a second, but you're back now.
Okay.
It's probably my internet crapping out again.
What was the last thing you heard?
That things are going to be presented much differently in the east of Germany, and that they're going to, their foothold there is a lot.
There is a much more there's a much more. So basically, after World War II, and especially like after the 70s, being like openly far right, that wasn't really possible, for obvious reasons. And in the West, it still isn't, for the most part. And that's why the Western AfD phrases stuff like, okay, we don't want any immigrants because like they don't work, or stuff like that. Your typical like far right messages.
They find some
And in
sort of rationalization for it, I would say.
exactly.
Yeah.
And in the East, there's like a much more conscious connection to the far right tradition in Germany that
Why?
climaxes in the Third Reich. It's just less taboo over there. So it's not like the AfD in the West is not in that tradition. They just can't afford to be that open about it and
But
have
why do you
electoral
think that
success.
is? Because like there's a big history that's to be acknowledged, that even though Germany is now one state, there are definitely still noticeable differences between ex-East Germany and ex-West Germany, insofar that there's a lot less infrastructure there, fewer people in general, incomes are lower, and general like quality of life tends to be lower on average. You know, it doesn't mean that everybody in East Germany is poor, of course, but there are some issues that have been brought about by the politics of the last 30 years or so that have unequally affected the ex-East. So we call them the new federal states sometimes as well. Like unequivocally more than the West.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been
There's a
for
lot
them
more
like,
frustration built up
yeah,
there.
let's not mince words here. Like for them, the reunification has in a lot of parts been absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
You saw that in a lot of Eastern Bloc countries, like when the Soviet Union collapsed and the markets got opened up to Western capital, to Western companies, and because it had been such an isolated economic system, they didn't really have a means of defend itself against like takeover from the West. You know, like Soviet Union has collapsed, your country's completely broke, nobody has money, everybody's hungry, and then like Western capital comes in with infinite amounts of money and just is able to buy anything out. Like what's in Russia, what's called the Great Theft, and during that process.
That's, by the way, that's always the lovely difference between how we tend to think about Glasnost, so then basically the 90s that happened in Russia, how we think of that in the West, the general West, and how Russians tend to think about it. Because for us, it's like this whole thing of like, oh, they were liberated, but for Russia, it's like the darkest period
Yeah, it
in
was
recent
for them. It
history.
was humiliating. Like it was,
Yeah.
it was there was the amount of like self-hatred that is connected to that era for Russians is really staggering.
Yeah.
And in the East, it's similar, because when Germany got reunited, they were really optimistic about becoming equal citizens to the West. And what happened after gave them the feeling that they really weren't, so that they were just being taken advantage of, or not being recognized as like equal citizens, that their companies aren't worth anything. And it even occurred that like companies from the West would come in and like buy up a company in the East that might have become a competitor to them and just like close them up. So
Yeah.
basically just like destroy any sort of competition.
Yeah, they got the short end of the stick on basically everything, and that's still very much visible today. Like that's not just an emotional trauma that people remember. That's still a reality for many people. And so, of course, for a lot of these people, there's still very valid frustrations built up, and also including disillusionment with politics in general. And this has been proven time and time again that this sort of climate, where people just feel completely disillusioned, are basically welcoming hotbeds for somebody to come in and with the right amount of populism be like, we're going to change everything for you. That's what happened in the US with like places like the Rust Belt. And that's what happened with a lot of East Germany, a lot of ex-East Germany in recent years concerning the AfD. And
Yeah.
I do think that, again, or I don't just think, this is a fact. This is also, again, partly due to the big parties, and I would say more so the SPD, dropping the ball on these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this also explains why the party that had been hegemonic in the East previously was the Left Party,
Yes.
who are now very much in a declining state. And I'm guessing we're probably going to move on into like the next election results. But yeah, this is like one development that showcases that this isn't necessarily connected to ideology. It's much more about, again, affect. It's about
disruption, basically.
Who will stick up for us?
Yeah. That's exactly. And I think this is, I'm pretty sure this is the comment that you like became aware of me about. I left a comment on another stream that Dan appeared in about, I used to do interviews, political interviews for anonymous pollings, basically, about like the current opinions of people on politics in Germany. And you would have this phenomenon known to basically all interviewers who had been there for a while, that if you were interviewing people from the ex-GDR, you would get a certain set of people who would basically answer questions in a way that would make you feel like they are completely erratic, because they would tell you that they are totally pro-extreme right-wing parties, and then in the next question about which parties were their favorites, also tell you that they were that they really liked Die Linke, which are and still in the past even more were considered extreme left. That doesn't seem to mesh. But like you just said, it's not so much about specific policies or ideological placement. It's much more about, okay, the current system is giving me nothing and has let me down the whole time. Obviously, something needs to change fundamentally. So I basically just want to show the government or everyone that I'm just change everything. Just have somebody come in and disrupt the whole thing. I don't care how.
Yes, and it also for the East, a lot of those vote allegiances were connected to personalities when it comes to the left party, and now that like these old big personalities in the left party in the East are retiring, voters are turning to like a new protest party, a different way of sticking it to the Westies.
The Westies, right. The endearing, not so endearing term for West Germans.
Yes.
I do kind of want to pontificate on one thing here. The AfD are now part of the parliamentary opposition. But they are dangerous. They're populist. They don't really base their politics on much. And they are Nazis in suits. I don't think that is a very... well, it is a controversial thing to say, but it really shouldn't be. They shy away from this, and there is a branch now that is more moderate and tries to sell themselves better, and that you could just call, or should just call, ultra-conservative. But there is definitely an anti-democratic aspect and part of this party.
Yeah, I mean, and if someone like takes offense to this, like it's in Germany we have this agency which is called Constitutional Protection, which is traditionally like a quite right-wing institution, but they said yes, like especially in the East, the aim of the AfD is to disrupt and overtake the democratic system that is in place right now. So it's not like they're, hey, we just want less immigration. No, they're actually they're really taking aim at abolishing the system as it exists.
Exactly, and sugarcoating doesn't help that. Yes. Okay, so really quickly, let's get to our current government. I'm going to pull up the election results from September. Yes, this is it. So, what do you make of our new government, which, as you can see, the numbers here, really underwhelming for the CDU, which is the black, almost said black bloc, the black part of this diagram. So usually they should have been like somewhere up here. So they really lost out. The biggest, although not by much, but the biggest party turned out to be the SPD. And because all parties were kind of split up and nobody wants to generally work with the AfD, they eventually settled on forming a government of SPD, Grüne, so the Greens, and FDP, Libertarians, who, as you can see, didn't get huge numbers, but it was enough to make a three-party coalition, which we now call the Traffic Light Coalition, Ampelkoalition. What do you make of our Ampelkoalition, Dan?
It's hard to say. I mean, they're just coming in, and their coalition contract has just been released. I should preempt this, that like, like in my analysis, I'm often accused of being like a bit of a pessimist. So take that as you will. But I'm not hugely enthusiastic about it. I personally would have wished for a red-red-green coalition, which wasn't possible electorally.
Because the Linke did really, really poorly, because basically they didn't find a place in the pre-election process. They didn't have any big topics, so they were basically ignored.
Yeah. And the reason for my pessimism isn't like just the parties involved. It's that the Free Democrats, the liberals, will take over the finance ministry, which de facto has a veto right on a lot of stuff, which puts like a potential stopgap on any progressive promise that like the Social Democrats or the Greens would have did promise in their election campaign. For instance, just to give like a practical example, there is this constitutional amendment in Germany that's called the debt brake. So it basically means that the federal government cannot run a cyclical deficit. So this basically like makes it illegal to have any kind of like long-term investment. And in the new coalition contract, most likely on pressure of the Free Democrats, the debt brake will remain as it is, unreformed. It will resume by 2023 after COVID hopefully ends. And this collides with the election promise of the Green Party, who promised 50 billion euros of annual investment into green technology. So I think what we're going to see, like this is just like me spitballing here, the prediction for what is about to happen, is a conflict between the interest of the FDP and the interest of climate change that the Greens and the SPD share.
I'm so sorry I missed that last part of the sentence. I got distracted by chat again.
No problem. So I think the big conflict is going to be between basically like the Free Democrats and when it comes to the issue of climate change. Like I think you're really going to see, as soon as the Greens and the SPD get into, okay, so yes, we're the government now, let's do these big investments. The FDP is going to do things like point to the inflation or the deficit or whatever.
Even though in the pre-election, in the process, they were also, I mean, everybody was basically talking about how they were going to save the planet, because obviously that's the big issue now. But the execution is going to be the interesting part. And I agree, yeah, of course, finances is whether you want to or not, going to be involved in a lot of other things, because a lot of other things cost money, and somebody has to decide about the budget for that. Which I did pick out this take you had on this on Twitter, because Please. I do think it does. Yes, so gonna make an ice cold prediction and say it will be SPD, Greens, FDP. This was before they decided which coalition to go with huge compromises towards the liberals like Lindner, who is the leader of the FDP right now, with Lindner becoming finance minister and the debt brake remaining as it is. The debt brake is the thing you just explained. I also like that you pointed out that legal weed, though. Let's focus on the important things here. No, but
that's a big upside.
I mean, you know, you could call this like a appeasement strategy, right? That they're now pushing things through that should have been done before a long time. Like, I'm happy that they're now about to legalize marijuana, and I'm happy that they're about to make it easier for trans people to just be who they are and have that accepted legally. Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm not saying those parts are unimportant or shouldn't have been done because they should have done something else, but I want them to do those things that boil down, in the case of trans rights, to human rights, and in the case of legalization to things that have been proven to be beneficial. And additionally take care of the thing that is threatening our whole planet and that other states have.
Yes.
Have
I mean, I don't want to downplay this achievement, like the reform of the making it easier to be a trans person in Germany and legalizing marijuana. All that stuff is great. It's just that that's just like my personal politics. I like to focus like on different stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. I do think you can criticize one thing while acknowledging another. I do think that's possible. I also don't think you have to, basically give somebody a free pass on something that they're messing up because they came through on something else. Might even quote Chris Rock in that context: "You don't get a cookie for something you're supposed to do."
Yeah, exactly. Those things were long overdue, especially the Transsexuellengesetz was like a disaster that still existed in the way it did.
Yeah. Basically forcing people into mandatory therapy for at least a year. I think 2 was the usual normal.
Yeah, and like their partner had agreed to it, or it was super weird.
Right. If they were married, something like that. Or, of course, then you get into the whole, like, what if you're 14, 15? What do your parents get to say? Like that whole thing. This is not a stream about trans rights, but it is a very current and important topic, still being pushed to the wayside a lot. So I am happy that they're addressing that. I am happy they're like dusting off stuff in some ways. But I do agree with you, and I did think I did agree with the thoughts that came up basically when it was becoming clear that this was going to be the coalition that we're going to end up with, where people were saying, well, great, so the FDP is basically the kingmaker in this situation, and they're therefore going to get to decide a lot of things, despite the fact that the SPD is the biggest majority here, and the Greens have been in the, what the hell is Wahlkampf? I keep wondering.
I don't know, like campaign?
Yes, in the campaigning process. Thank you. I keep saying pre-election, and that's not the word I'm looking for. Yes. Who in the campaigning process were very like adamant about like, we're not going to compromise on this, we're not going to compromise on this. And of course we have to work together on this, but the climate is not discussable.
Yes.
It turns out it was already discussable. Like,
yeah, of course. Yeah. Like for them, yeah, of course everything's on the table. Like especially with the way the Greens have been going. Like it was, I hope that like after, so for people who aren't fully caught up on this, it leaked out even before the coalition contract was fully decided on, that it looked like the Free Democrats had a lot of sway, and if everyone was kind of hoping like, okay, this is probably just so like the Free Democrats base is like happy, but in the final agreement it will be much more balanced. But turns out that's not actually the case.
Nah. And of course, I mean, we're at the very beginning, right? We have 4 years ahead of us of this government, and maybe the SPD will now dare for pushing for more than they were when they were unwillingly locked into working together with the CDU for the last few years. We'll see what it brings, but it falls into line with compromise elections, like we saw in the US last year, where it's like, well, this is better than the alternative.
Yes.
In our case, literally. So I'm excited to see what will come of it. We are running over time, so I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to ask you 2 questions to wrap this up.
Please.
One is, what is your take on the phrase, wer hat uns verraten, Sozialdemokraten?
Do you want to translate that for the audience real quick?
Yes.
Or it's just okay.
Oh, I was gonna let you translate it if you wanted
Okay,
to.
yeah,
but
that's
sure.
that's fine. That's
Yeah,
fine.
go ahead.
It's basically like a political slogan, a long-standing political slogan that says "Who betrayed us?" Social Democrats, but of course it rhymes in German. And it's a take that stems back to the Weimar time, where the far left in the country felt betrayed by the Social Democrats, who did not want to align with the revolution in Russia and with the Bolshevists, but wanted to have like a democratic, like a democratic system, like a democratic parliamentary system instead of like a Soviet council system. And the Social Democrats basically stomped out any kind of left resistance to this, and this is this is where that slogan originates from. But throughout the years, after that, it got also used by the Nazis,
Right.
and after 2000,
Like they
there was
co-opted so many things. That was one
exactly.
of the things.
And after
yes.
like the early 2000s, of course, there was the version of it, wer uns verraten, Sozialdemokraten, und wer war mit dabei, die Grüne Partei, which is like who betrayed us, Social Democrats, and who was like on board the Green Party.
I didn't know that version of it. Yeah. So that was in the stuff we talked about earlier of not following through on the social goals.
This feeling of betrayal by more left-wing elements in the party. Like, I don't have anything against that slogan at all. Like, I don't take offense to it. I'm not like a member of the SPD or anything.
Oh no, I wasn't trying to like set you off or anything. I just do. I feel like some people might have only heard that as a Nazi slogan because they were so good at turning things around on people. That's not a compliment.
And also because like the left wing, the opposition to the Social Democrats is typically is occupied by the right wing in Germany. As sad as that is. And now that like this criticism is coming from on the left, people are like quick to jump to calling this like Nazi methods or whatever.
Which makes the left has it. This is the leftist infighting thing is a big issue, and historically has been, as we can see from this, as understandable as it is, of course. So I think the interesting thing about this slogan is that it does come from like the left edge being like, hey guys, you're supposed to be on our side. Go with what's good. And it's come up recently again too. So I know that it's been seen being used in Fridays for Future demonstrations, which basically echo the same thing. Like, you were supposed to be with us, and you're not.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. And then lastly, we're going to wrap this up, trying in a desperate, pathetic attempt to loop this back into this being a German learning channel. Dan, what's your favorite German word?
Oh man, I tried to think this entire. I tried to come up with this time and time again. Like, can I just choose soziale Kälte? I like that turn of phrase. It's not one word, but if I can like cheat that way, I'll pick that.
I think that's completely fine. It is 2 words.
Or wait, I have an even better one.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I have
ahead.
an even better one. I really like the term. This is also stays in the realm of politics. Massenverelendung.
Oh, you're gonna have to explain that.
Yeah, it basically means like mass immiseration. It was like a political slogan, especially like in the Weimar times, where you saw a lot of people like just like falling into destitute due to political and economic conditions.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I don't think I've ever heard that term. Probably haven't gotten far enough.
Oh my god, I can't believe this. Like, I'm talking to someone who teaches English, and I'm able to give you.
Yes, you taught me a new word. Awesome. You get a gold star. Yes. Probably haven't gotten far enough on your podcast to hear that yet. So I think that's gonna wrap things up for today. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope we got to give you a good view, a good overview over German politics, the history, and the parties. Again, it's a huge It's a huge topic. Of course, there's so much more to say about this, but I do think we did manage to, give an overview, give an idea, give some context. That was really the point of it all. Thank you once again to Dan for accompanying me in this and adding.
My pleasure. Anytime. I had a great time.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. Much needed value, because like I know enough to get around and to have opinions on this, but I am not I am not a history baller, and I'm not as much of a politics buff as I should be, having started at least to study political science. So it's always nice to get help on this. Do please check out Dan's YouTube and the Iron Dice podcast, especially. YouTube channel 3 Arrows is a bit more about current political topics, while the Iron Dice but discusses or explains, I should say, the history between 1918, right now at least, between 1918 and 1933, or are you going to go beyond that?
I'm not so sure yet. I'll keep it open.
Okay.
I'll keep it open as a cliffhanger.
It's all linked in the description, also including Dan's Twitter. Is there anything you'd like to say?
No, just thank you for the time. Thank you for the pleasant conversation. And that's about it. Until next time, then.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I like that you're keeping it open that way. Until next time, then. Bye, everyone. Oh, no, actually, I have to say tschüss. Tschüss.
Tschüss.